Okay, let's see.
You got a little smaller recorder this time.
Yeah, that's my own. Okay, so first of all, the content that came out of our last session is really incredible. We spoke over an hour, and we touched on a lot of sensitive areas. I think it was a real successful session last time. We were starting to make some inductions and deductions on some of the materials that I've been coming up with, and so and what you've been reflecting on from your experience.
Did you find that film yet?
Okay, so as far as the film goes, I went down to the state library, and you can't look up a film just by the producer, you know. So it's either titled under the subject of Eskimos, okay, and there was a million, you know,
Eskimos?
No, a lot of film, a lot of videotapes done, and
yeah.
And so I just went through them one by one, looking at the titles on the microfiche, and a lot of interesting titles, a lot of them kind of on some issues that we might like to deal with. So that was kind of exciting that I didn't just go and find one film that you thought I saw. What's
certainly
available.
That was my purpose in that. Having you research all that stuff.
Yeah, you didn't want to give me the real title, just so.
I'm curious to know what the real title is now.
But my one guess is it called Yesterday and Today? Does that sound familiar? That was the closest one I could come up with. That was early 70s, put out by the Canadian Film Board. But there was no producer called Sky River in any of under the Eskimo title.
Yesterday and Today.
And it sounded like from the little annotation that was something like, there was a couple of them that had similar annotations to what you said this was about, talking about families' feelings of
kids going away to school.
Yeah. So or just family effects on the community from you know, other cultural influences, you know, getting in there, you know, how that affected it. But there was no Sky River producer in anything under Eskimo. Could it be under another subject area for that particular one that you'd...
Education, did you look under education?
No. We can do that next.
Education, boarding schools, regional
and had to do with the
schools.
boarding school?
Okay. Look under education.
So probably turn up another dozen or so really interesting ones. There's already a number of these ones that I looked at under Eskimo that I want to look at.
Yeah, you want to preview them, huh?
Yeah, so if I come up with anything that's really good for our purposes,
let me know.
Something you might be interested in seeing.
Look under education.
Okay, and boarding schools, perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. It's definitely Sky River, though.
Yeah, I'm convinced of that.
Okay, now, since we covered so much yesterday and touched on so many specific issues, before I actually got off on some specific directions, I still wanted to go one more week in my investigations on some concept foundations on what are some, you know, what's the proper ideals for village development, rural development, and city-village interaction. So I read two essays by Rabindranath Tagore, the Indian essayist from India, who wrote a lot of important essays on those whole concepts of how the British government coming into the Indian culture over there and the Indians' feelings toward the British. And so he only mentions those specifics in relation to his broader ideas and ideals. So I'm not dealing with specific issues in India, but his concepts of how the village people felt, because there's many, many more kinds of villages, and it's still the same kind of thing. The British tried to come in and do their school type things, introducing Western ideas. A little more extreme because it's totally Eastern and Western things, but still very similar things. So and I had read some of his previous stuff. That's why I got inspired to go back and look at that at this point. So I read one
That's interesting.
It is interesting, and I think you'd love this stuff. I read one called The Call of Truth, which talks about, he's talking about how the Indian people should make developing their communities an extension of themselves, that people can't, if you become nothing but a parasite off of where you're living, just living off of it, not inputting anything into it, then you're nothing, then it's bound to degenerate, and you're bound to succumb to any other kind of direction that wants to come in and manipulate you. And so what he's saying is it's a call to the people of the villages to work towards making that village an extension of themselves, to make it forge their sense of culture stronger, in order that then at that point they can choose consciously what they're going to accept from the outside. So, but if they lose their own sense of their cultural foundation, or their sense of inputting into what's being progressed, he's not, and he's chastising Indians for wanting to revert back into their old ways. Those just won't work anymore, he says. There's different things happening in the world. But he says you have to, he says he's calling to the Indians to develop their sense of culture in the village, but with these new elements that are coming in from Western civilization. So he says, you can't go back to your old ways, and that won't work, but you can't just do nothing and let it happen upon you, because otherwise your own sense of it. But you have to keep your sense of building the community yourselves. Isn't that interesting?
It is, yeah.
And that's, and we can see, I think, in our own, what happened here to our villages, how we took away their values, said, here's your values now, but then they just totally lose their sense of purpose for inputting into community life, wanting to, and so that's a real base. That's something to look at, of how they lost. They were building their culture through available means at that time, and they were strong communities back then before they ever came into contact. They were building with what. Then this whole new onrush of new facilities came in, but to adapt, and they should have kept on their motivation for building their own community with these things instead of being overrun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very interesting.
It gave me a lot of ideas, and how, and then secondly, the second essay I called was called City and Village. And so he defines, and this is a real fascinating one, he defines the difference between city. He said, and this was illuminating for me because I wondered about this, is a village just a miniature city, or do they have definite different roles? And so he defines them, that a village has a definite role and a city has a definite role, and there's a definite kind of mutual interaction that has to happen for there to be proper progress in both. And so what he says, that proper mutual relationship, is that the villages are places where community life is created, where it's communal life. The individual isn't so important as his role in the community as a whole is important. Whereas in the city, the cities are the places of the greater resources of knowledge, the greater stores of knowledge, and where individuals come to be leaders in that, who have been able to utilize a lot of that resources of knowledge, and then become a leader and join with others who have become professional in certain resources of that knowledge, have joined together to become a leading class for the city, and direct then from that leading class the proper operations within the city. Do you understand what? So And so he says the mutual interaction between those two is that the villages help sustain the city because they give examples of some proper community relationships that hold those leaders in play. They give the proper example so that those leaders in the city don't become oppressors of the people, but become this mutual interaction because they're such a pure representation of mutual interaction.
Yeah.
But he says what happens is the city people tend to prey upon the village people for their resources and control the village people by not allowing them to be their own entity with their own interactions, but tend to prey upon them and just want to use their human resources for the city's own benefit and that class of people in the city.
That's really neat stuff.
Isn't that?
And when was it written?
1920s.
Yeah, I gotta find that reference.
I
What do you got? Is it in a book?
Oh yeah, it's a book of his. That's in fact I can give you it. I think I brought it.
I'd like to see it.
Just fascinating. He's got a bunch of stuff about education because he was born in the city, but he moved to the village and started a school
In India.
there in India.
No.
Started a school there, and then this whole thing. He lived in the area of Mahatma Gandhi and has some things to say about what Gandhi was trying to do, what good things he didn't, some things he felt Gandhi didn't do right. And, just real interesting. Gave me a good foundation, good concepts.
Yeah.
No longer do I believe a village is a miniature city. There is definite different roles, and that's kind of what I tried to question you before. Define for me rule, define for me city, define for me primate. That really brought some things together for me.
Oh, that's great. That really is. That's encouraging.
What it makes me
You've
feel.
had a good week then, huh?
Yeah, well, I read those two. I wanted to do a lot of more specific investigation, but I guess I was just, I felt moved to do that, to read those things, and that I felt was enough for, that could have, don't you think that could have a lot of, those ideas of defining what should properly happen, what should have properly happened in our past, is a good, thing for people. Do they know that? Do they hear that ever? Or did anyone ever tell them that?
I don't know. I don't know if anybody ever did. I doubt it. Who should perform that role? Which governmental entity, or is it the government that should be even involved with that sort of dissemination of information and ideas? Whose role is it? Is that school's role? University? Other aspect of state government? I don't know.
Whose is it now?
Yeah.
Who is the ones, or who are the ones who did go in and pull these values away? What?
People who went in to make a determination as to whether or not a small or a high school should be established was made up of a group of people consisting of representatives from Alaska Legal Services, played a major role in this effort. Some people from the Department of Education, and other school-related people. By school, I mean somebody from the district, the school district, serving that particular community. Go in and they'd call for a community meeting. explain what this whole opportunity for the local high school is all about. And then they would give the community a certain period of time to have an opportunity to vote. And the local community would pass a resolution. There's a whole procedure that is followed. But a lot of that information that explained to the village regarding what was available to them was done by Alaska Legal Services and educators. Lawyers and educators. What a mix.
Before I ask you who the Alaska Legal Services and what kind of documentation or what kind of authority they had to do that, I want to ask, I think our question no longer, after, reading this stuff, I think our question is no longer what makes up a strong school or what made up a strong school in our villages, but we should be asking what makes a strong community, and then how can schools help in that?
That's right.
And isn't there a difference there where educators are creating something that's foreign, an alien system almost?
Can be, yeah. It doesn't have to be, but it
Right.
pretty much can be. When people say, what makes a good rural school, I say, what makes a good community? Because I think, as I may have indicated to you, when you talk in terms of, people always want to know, well, how does this community compare with that community, as a school? Or how does their school in this community compare with this one? You ask a whole lot of questions about the community itself. How well does the community work together? Has the community decided what their role is? That's really a critical area. What is the role of the community?
In relation to the bigger cities, yeah. The thing is, it's all tied into how the policies, how they fund the schools too, because how each community, especially in Alaska, is so individual that how can they do this funding by head count, or how can they do these standardizations from a state level? It's so
Pretty tough. Yeah, it doesn't fit, does it?
And that's where I would say then our focus of the wrong decisions at any point where they tried to make some generalizations. What were those points where major generalizations were made?
I don't know if I understand that question. Run that one by again. I
Like
might need a little more of a preface to that.
Where they made policies for the schools based on generalizations of all the schools, rather, which all our schools need this, all our schools need that, all our schools need this, when there could have been much more individual needs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm trying to sort it out, so I don't know quite how to respond to that.
Is it a valid question?
I think so. I'm trying to think in terms of what the real question is in the general question that you asked me. The general question isn't appropriate, but I don't know quite how to respond to it. I guess I'm looking for a sub-part of that I can build on. Maybe we'll come back to that. I don't know how to think about that.
Well, let's say, when the whole idea of funding by head count came in, how do they say, was there any other ideas?
Yeah, when the head count computation came about, it had to do with an interim measure, and it was assumed that the head count figure that is determined for each school district, and they're all different. There are 53 different head count amounts. That the school district had a variety of special programs already in place. Like they had so much bilingual because they have bilingual needs. They had so much voc ed in that community because that was a priority of the community. There was a certain amount of special ed money going into that district because there was a need for that. And all of these things were computed on separate formulas on the basis of kids who are eligible or in need of those services in that particular district. And all of that money was put together for that district, taking into account bilingual, all these things unique to that district. And the total amount of money was put together, and then they just divided it by the number of kids in school. Go over to the next district, they didn't have as much special ed. They had no bilingual education. They had no interest in voc ed, so they didn't offer any. They had their money coming to them from the state for these other programs that were a priority and a need to them. Took that total amount of money for that district and divided it by the number of kids in that district. So in essence, the assumption was that the unique needs of each community or of each school district have been taken into account by virtue of the amounts they're getting from these categorical programs. Now we're going to put all of this in a composite divided by the number of students, and we'll get a figure that's unique to each school district. And that's how the head count thing came out. However, if a school district was overcompensating for a need at the time that this amount was determined, it would skew the figure, one direction. Or if they were underfunding or undercompensating for a need, that figure might be skewed in another direction. So it wasn't truly, it wouldn't necessarily be an accurate figure. And if there's no adjustment made within a fairly short period of time, or no complete examination made as to whether or not that dollar amount is speaking to unique needs of the community, there would be a generalized figure that would be used, becomes a generalized figure which may not be in tune with what's really needed. And that's just the way schools are funded.
It's easy for them.
Oh yeah, it's mechanically easy, and it's it gets the job done, but not as carefully as we might want to see it be done. I guess. Okay, on the basis of that, where do you see us going in the future now with what you've read and what we've discussed up to this point? What other theme areas are you, or other threads are beginning to run through your thinking and your work to this point? Are you ever going to be able to sort all this out and make put together a first-rate report, an article, and
I am thinking about a paper then, and I guess we'll aim at delivering it. I'll aim at putting it together and delivering it at the end of the semester. Though the overall aim is that I'm building my sense of we're building a sense of exploring questions that people haven't explored and and the resources available to explore those questions with. And a lot of things have happened already because of the things we've touched upon. We've touched some sensitive issues that are deadened senses for other people. Have become almost mechanical, but we're questioning some things why.
I think it's kind of neat. I think you're really having a good time with it. It's been very interesting for me.
Last week, so many interesting things came out of it.
If you could ever find that missing film, you'd really impress me.
Okay, I'll make that a major goal then.
I want to see that film again.
But the main thing the main theme is how did we take away the community's values, their sense of community, and put in other values into that community, which are useless for the real education.
Through education.
Through education. That's a major theme, and what we discussed last time was how were they strong anyway in their own sense of transferring their dancing and their ceremonies and their fashions and their building of their own materials and their building of their own sense of their community? How were they already strong in that sense of transferring that culture from generation to generation? How did what we imposed pull things away, which almost, I guess, adding that to what I read this week, how did that disrupt that proper role of the village, and how is perhaps the city oppressing that and taking away from the people their own sense of direction by trying to impose some other direction, but it isn't a real direction for the community.
Yeah.
It's a direction for the state, maybe, or some state aims. And so by that, well, I'll be investigating then some individual communities. Do you have anything more to say about about the concept of the role of the village and the role of the...
No, I was just thinking about that. I'm trying to sort that out. Village role. You know, I'd be interested in knowing a little bit more about what's said about the role of the village. I don't know if I've ever talked about the role of the village. What is the role of the village? Because unless the role of the village is understood by somebody, can the role of the school be really understood? In other words, the relationship between the community and the school obviously there's a direct relationship in as far as effectiveness of a school program and the organization of a village. In other words, I mentioned before, is there an active village council, an IRA council? Is there evidence of strong families or structure of informal, not necessarily formal, maybe an informal power structure in the village that enables the village to get certain things accomplished for the benefit of the village itself. But we have an idea that where you find some of those indicators, you also will find a strong school because it's supported by the parents. There are expectation levels established by the parents that our kids are going to do well. They're going to do well in a variety of ways, but it's transmitted to the students by the parents and by the community. We expect you to do well. We expect a certain type of behavior of our young people. We expect the teachers to perform along certain lines. And we expect the teachers to be involved here in this aspect of our lives, but we really don't expect them to be involved over here. In our families and in our homes and so forth. But that basic question now is what's the role of the village? Is the village to serve as a geographic location for bringing together of a certain number of people in a large area so that there's an opportunity for mutual support to help one another, to share, to have an arrangement so that there can be sharing of food, there can be sharing of fuel, there can be sharing of shelter, there can be kind of a looking out for one another type spirit, attitude in that community. that it's a place for family members to gather, that there are extended families within this particular village, and by having the family, extended family members, immediate family and extended family members together, that we can have greater strength as a family, or is the village exist there because it's a nice place to live, or there's good water and good supply of fuel, or what are some of the real purposes of the village structure? My sense is that they're there because there is a feeling of, by having larger numbers and by having immediate and extended family members in close proximity, there's strength in that there's a mutual support, and that there's a working together to make their own lives better. Well, that's all interwoven in some kind of a family and extended family structure as a small society, and as a result, if you see that happening. Sure, go ahead. That a lot of this is going to spill over into how the school is operated and how the school functions and the effectiveness of the school.
Right. It's like there's a perfection of that role that education should be aimed at developing in the people. There's a perfection of that community life, and education should be aimed at making that aim more perfect. Whereas in the city, according to Tagore, that the perfection of education is perhaps increasing those centers of knowledge and academic centers, which the village can draw off of it in times of need, and to bring into their village by their choice, by their needs, by, they know those resources are there to come forth to help them strengthen their community life, rather than trying to make the village a place where they also create those centers of great knowledge. Maybe the villages maybe aren't the place for that, but the education in the villages means taking what we have from the cities, achieving in the cities, and utilizing it to strengthen the elements of the community and the intelligent.
Yeah.
But what we don't do, what we are doing then is bringing in these city aims into the village, and it distorts the community. And that's so obvious. We distorted the community. We pulled children out of it. We took away the family because we wanted some other kind of establishment.
Yeah.
We did it wrong.
Yeah. Timothy, I'm going to have to run.
Okay.
But what I'd like to do is have us pick up again next week. Excuse me, I won't be here next week. I'm going to be in Anchorage.
Okay.
And a week after that is that spring break week. So it'll be several weeks before we get back. But I'd really like to talk some more about this role. I'm really kind of intrigued now about this role of the village and how it meshes with the role of the school.
Are you going to be around the university tomorrow or the next day?
Yeah, I'm going to be around here tomorrow for a while, and Friday morning there's a staff meeting going on, so I'll be kind of in and out of here.
Well, I'll leave that. I think maybe I'm going to reread that Tagore once more, and then I'll give it to you to just
look at it as you go back at it, maybe, and you could help me in this regard. If you go back and maybe make a few notes that you could give me from your reading in those two essays. A few notes that you might want to make on this business of the role of the community and so forth. I'd say I won't have time to probably read a whole lot of the material, but if I could see some outline stuff or some notes, if you get a chance, it doesn't have to be anything special, just some ideas that you have that as you go back at it and look at it now in terms of, all right, what's this telling us about the role of education?
And you want me to leave those notes with the essays? And then you can
I
can highlight some areas
Yeah,
for
just
you.
you can make a few notes on that, and then just leave them here. Would be real good. Are you going to be around here during the spring vacation, or are you going to be?
I'll be in Juneau.
Yeah.
But I think, see, we're putting some elements together. Last week we talked about, I had read that Barnhart's thing on community-oriented education, and now we're dealing with why that should happen, or why things like that should work, according and putting it in this larger perspective. The roles, why maybe it can work in this village, but not here, and there is a difference.
Oh, you bet. Well, I hope this sort of stuff is useful to you.
Good. I hope it's useful for your time.
Oh, yeah, I enjoy it because it's making me think about some of these things. It stimulates thinking about, some very basic things that sometimes we don't even think about. Or you think about them, but, not in any great depth. Okay, well, thanks for coming in. Again, I'm sorry I missed you on Monday.
No problem. Thanks for spending the time with me.
Oh, that's my pleasure. I'm glad to see you take that in.